I never imagined that the day my father's will was read would mark the beginning of my reckoning, a reckoning that would ultimately redefine my life. The old mansion was filled with somber relatives and distant acquaintances, all gathering in the dim light of a chilly autumn afternoon. I sat there, resolute yet numb, awaiting the words that would change everything. I could still recall the precise moment my father's lawyer cleared his throat to commence the reading, his voice echoing off the high, creaking ceilings. Just as I began to sense that something was off, a chilling laugh sliced through the air. I turned my gaze toward my wife, Cassandra, whose smile was all too infuriating. In that instant, she declared, with a careless audacity that stung me deeply, "I stole the money and confessed to cheating." The words hung in the silence like a poisonous cloud. Her tone was mocking, as if she were sharing a trivial secret rather than shattering our lives. I felt an immediate surge of cold fury, a mix of disbelief and steely resolve. For years, I had known Cassandra to be untrustworthy, a woman whose charm belied a ruthless ambition and a penchant for cruelty. Yet even then, I hadn't imagined she would choose such a public, irreverent moment to expose her deceit. I watched as her eyes danced with a perverse delight, as though unveiling a scandalous secret at a family gathering was her idea of a grand performance. Her laughter, light and scornful, echoed in my ears long after the room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. At first, I wondered if it was a twisted joke, a macabre form of entertainment in an otherwise morose setting. But the glint in her eyes, the barely concealed smirk on her lips, and the careless way she leaned back in her chair spoke volumes of a calculated malice. Cassandra had always. I never imagined that the day my father's will was read would mark the beginning of my reckoning, a reckoning that would ultimately redefine my life. The old mansion was filled with somber relatives and distant acquaintances, all gathering in the dim light of a chilly autumn afternoon. I sat there, resolute yet numb, awaiting the words that would change everything. I could still recall the precise moment my father's lawyer cleared his throat to commence the reading, his voice echoing off the high, creaking ceilings. Just as I began to sense that something was off, a chilling laugh sliced through the air. I turned my gaze toward my wife, Cassandra, whose smile was all too infuriating. In that instant, she declared, with a careless audacity that stung me deeply, "I stole the money and confessed to cheating." The words hung in the silence like a poisonous cloud. Her tone was mocking, as if she were sharing a trivial secret rather than shattering our lives. I felt an immediate surge of cold fury, a mix of disbelief and steely resolve. For years, I had known Cassandra to be untrustworthy, a woman whose charm belied a ruthless ambition and a penchant for cruelty. Yet even then, I hadn't imagined she would choose such a public, irreverent moment to expose her deceit. I watched as her eyes danced with a perverse delight, as though unveiling a scandalous secret at a family gathering was her idea of a grand performance. Her laughter, light and scornful, echoed in my ears long after the room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. At first, I wondered if it was a twisted joke, a macabre form of entertainment in an otherwise morose setting. But the glint in her eyes, the barely concealed smirk on her lips, and the careless way she leaned back in her chair spoke volumes of a calculated malice. Cassandra had always been adept at playing the victim, a master of deception who cloaked her true intentions behind a mask of sweet condescension. Now, however, she had overstepped even her own boundaries. In that charged moment, as whispers and shocked murmurs began to ripple among our guests, I realized that nothing was as it seemed. My father's will, the source of the day's solemnity, suddenly seemed trivial in comparison to the drama unfolding before me. I felt a stirring deep inside, a mix of betrayal, indignation, and an unyielding hunger for retribution. The cold truth was plain. Cassandra's false confession was as calculated as it was hurtful. She intended not only to humiliate me, but to dismantle the very foundation of the life I thought we had built together. I sat there, every detail searing into my mind. I remembered the countless nights when her lies had eroded the trust between us, the furtive phone calls, the secretive smiles exchanged with mysterious strangers, and the dismissive way she brushed off my concerns with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. Yet I had chosen to ignore the red flags, comforting myself with delusions of loyalty and trust. Now, as her confession rang in the silence of that austere room, every suppressed doubt coalesced into a single, burning resolve. I would have my revenge, and it would be executed with the cold precision my father had once admired in me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father, a man of honor who had instilled in me a sense of duty and justice, had bequeathed his fortune to me with the hope that I would use it wisely and with integrity. Instead, here I was, betrayed by the very person I had once vowed to cherish. But even in that moment of betrayal, a part of me felt a disturbing clarity, a clarity that revealed the depths of her duplicity and my own capacity for decisive, unyielding action. I left the gathering with a heavy heart, yet a mind already weaving the threads of a plan. Cassandra's unexpected declaration had shifted the balance irrevocably. The lies, the deceit, and her shameless arrogance would all be repaid in full. As I stepped out into the biting autumn air, every breath seemed to crystallize my determination. I would play this game on my own terms, with every calculated move designed to expose her for the fraud she truly was. The seeds of revenge had been sown in that fateful moment, and I vowed to nurture them with unwavering resolve. Even as I navigated the labyrinth of family secrets and shattered illusions, I knew that my next steps would be marked by cold, deliberate action, a plan that would leave Cassandra with no choice but to confront the true consequences of her treachery. Little did she know, the grand design of my retribution was only just beginning to unfold. After that fateful day, every moment of my existence became a careful study in betrayal and planning. In the solitude of my study, with the cold light of dawn seeping through the windows, I began to draft the blueprint of my revenge. I knew that Cassandra's public confession was merely a prelude, a desperate attempt to mask her true transgressions. Beneath that veneer of bravado lay a web of lies and illicit affairs, all meticulously hidden behind her pretty smile and genteel manners. Now, armed with both the weight of my father's legacy and the raw pain of betrayal, I vowed to dismantle her carefully constructed world. For weeks, I immersed myself in the undercurrents of our past, dissecting every conversation, every fleeting glance, every moment that had hinted at her disloyalty. I contacted old friends, discreet informants, and even those I once trusted to observe the subtle cues of Cassandra's behavior. Each piece of evidence I unearthed served to further confirm what I had suspected all along. Cassandra was not only a cunning liar but also a master manipulator, orchestrating her affairs with the precision of a seasoned con artist. I began to retrace her steps, the mysterious phone calls at odd hours, the secret meetings in dimly lit cafes, and the furtive glances exchanged with a man whose identity I was determined to expose. My investigation revealed a sordid tapestry of deceit that spanned years. It wasn't just a single betrayal, it was a series of calculated moves intended to keep me in the dark while she enjoyed the spoils of her infidelity. The more I discovered, the colder and more resolved I became. Cassandra's arrogance was her greatest weapon. In our private moments, she continued to flaunt her supposed confession as a twisted badge of honor. At dinner parties and social gatherings, her laughter rang out as she boasted about the scandal she had ignited. She played the role of the provocateur, delighting in the discomfort of those around her, all the while assuming that her manipulation of the narrative would protect her. But I was no longer the naive husband who once believed in every promise and sweet lie she uttered. I had seen the truth behind her mask, and I was prepared to use it against her. I recalled a particular evening, a night when the city's neon lights masked the darker corners of human nature. Cassandra had been unusually animated, her eyes glinting with a dangerous mix of mischief and malice. In a whispered conversation over expensive wine, she admitted to a trusted confidant that her confession at the will reading was a calculated diversion. "No one needs to know the real extent of what I've done," she had said, her tone laced with cruel satisfaction. That revelation, though shared in secrecy, had ignited a flame within me that could not be extinguished. As I sat in the silence of my study, plotting the next phase of my strategy, I began to consider the possibility of turning the tables in a way that would expose her for the fraud she truly was. I decided that the first step was to gather indisputable evidence of her infidelities, evidence that could shatter her carefully curated persona beyond repair. My plan involved not only uncovering her hidden liaisons, but also ensuring that those closest to her, the friends and associates who had turned a blind eye, would be forced to face the truth. One of my first moves was to confront the man who had been her frequent companion. I arranged a discreet meeting in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. The meeting was as unceremonious as it was revealing. The man, a shadow of the charming rogue he pretended to be, was reluctant at first. Yet, when I showed him proof, a series of texts, photographs, and even recorded conversations, his resolve crumbled. He admitted that Cassandra had manipulated him, using both charm and threats, to secure his silence and cooperation in her schemes. I left the meeting with a trove of damning evidence, each item a nail in the coffin of her deceitful empire. Yet, even as I compiled these fragments of her betrayal, I knew the importance of patience. Cassandra was unpredictable, and her network of accomplices was both loyal and dangerous. I moved cautiously, building my case like a master tactician setting his pieces on a chessboard. Every contact, every anonymous tip, Every stray detail of her double life was catalogued meticulously. The more I unearthed, the clearer it became. Cassandra had woven a tapestry of lies so elaborate that it threatened to engulf not just her reputation but also the lives of those who had unknowingly become entangled in her web. Even now, I could almost hear her laugh, mocking, insincere, and full of contempt. That laughter, which had once cut through the silence of that fateful gathering, now served as the haunting soundtrack of my resolve. I was not merely seeking retribution for the betrayal of our marriage. I was intent on reclaiming my honor and restoring the legacy my father had entrusted to me. Cassandra's confessions and calculated deceptions were a final act of desperation, and I would ensure that every lie was met with a cold, unyielding truth. With my plans firmly in motion and a file of evidence that could topple her from the heights of her deceitful reign, I prepared for the next phase. Cassandra believed she was in control, that her public bravado had secured her safety. Little did she know that I was already orchestrating the downfall of her entire world, an intricate trap that would reveal every betrayal, every lie, and every stolen moment of our shared life. The stage was set, and the game had only just begun. I moved silently through the days that followed, each one a calculated step in my grand design. While Cassandra reveled in her newfound notoriety, parading as if her scandalous confession had elevated her to an unassailable pedestal, I was busy constructing a damning dossier that would shatter her world irreparably. Every interaction, every hushed conversation in dim corridors, every digital trace of her covert rendezvous was catalogued with the precision of a master strategist. The first twist in my meticulously laid plan came when I discovered that Cassandra had been feeding selective truths to an influential group of individuals, an inner circle of society's elite who, blinded by her charm and wit, believed her carefully crafted persona. They were her accomplices, unwittingly complicit in her deceit. It was clear that to dismantle her empire, I had to target not just the facade she wore, but also the very foundations upon which her influence was built. I began by reaching out to one such confidant, a high-powered business associate who had once admired her cunning. Under the pretext of seeking clarification on some dubious financial maneuvers she had orchestrated, I managed to arrange a private meeting in a secluded hotel lounge. The tension in that room was palpable. I questioned him with a disarming calm that belied the storm raging within me. At first, he was reticent, clinging to carefully rehearsed lines of denial. But with each probing question and the silent presentation of incontrovertible evidence, screenshots of encrypted messages, bank statements, and audio recordings of incriminating conversations, his resolve crumbled like brittle glass. His confession became the first spark to ignite the wildfire of public disgrace that I had planned. Yet, it wasn't merely about exposing Cassandra's financial deceit or her web of lies. It was about dismantling the entire facade of her life. I found records of secret meetings with individuals who held considerable sway in various circles, from influential socialites to shady figures on the fringes of society. Every name added another layer of complexity to the intricate tapestry of her treachery. I realized that Cassandra's true art lay in her ability to compartmentalize, to isolate her darker deeds from her everyday charm. That realization only steeled my determination further. One rainy evening, as I pored over countless documents in the solitude of my study, an unexpected visitor arrived, a figure from Cassandra's past. Someone who had once been close to her before her veneer of perfection was meticulously constructed. He was a man who had suffered at her hands, his own life upended by her merciless ambitions. His eyes were heavy with regret as he recounted whispered conversations and clandestine meetings that painted a stark picture of Cassandra's manipulations. This new piece of testimony, raw and unfiltered, lent my case an even greater sense of inevitability. I left that encounter with a renewed sense of purpose. The scales of justice were tilting, and Cassandra's moment of reckoning was drawing near. Amid the gathering storm of revelations, I devised a plan to publicly unveil her duplicity. The idea was as audacious as it was vindictive, a gala event, one that Cassandra would be compelled to attend, where every guest would be armed with the truth of her misdeeds. The invitation, sent under the guise of an exclusive celebration of my father's legacy, would serve as the stage for her ultimate humiliation. I orchestrated every detail with cold precision, from the carefully selected guest list, including those who had suffered from her machinations, to the hidden microphones and discreet cameras that would record every moment of her unraveling. I worked in the shadows, coordinating with allies who had grown tired of her tyranny. Each meeting, each clandestine phone call, brought me closer to the moment when her carefully constructed reality would crumble before her very eyes. The more I unearthed, the more I began to understand the art of her manipulation, and therein lay my greatest weapon. I was no longer the hapless husband who had once been ensnared by her deceit. I was a man transformed, fueled by a cold, unrelenting desire for retribution. It was during one of these late-night sessions, under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp, that I received the final piece of evidence, a video recording of a private conversation between Cassandra and a mysterious partner in crime. In it, her tone shifted from mocking bravado to a chilling calculation, discussing plans that extended far beyond our personal betrayal. This revelation was the linchpin of my entire operation. It not only confirmed her disloyalty but also exposed a network of corruption that implicated several high-ranking figures in our social circle. With this, I knew that the gala event would not just be a personal vendetta, but a public reckoning of an entire cabal of deceit. As I sat back and surveyed the sprawling evidence, a calm determination settled over me. I was confident, resolute, and utterly unyielding. Cassandra had thought she could use her lies to manipulate everyone, but she had underestimated the power of a man scorned and betrayed. Every detail, every whispered conversation, and every hidden truth was now a weapon in my arsenal. I was prepared to use them with the precision of a scalpel, to cut away the layers of her treachery until nothing remained but the raw, unvarnished truth. In that quiet, dark room, I made a silent vow. Cassandra's days of deceit were numbered. And when the moment came for her ultimate exposure, there would be no escape, no redemption, only the cold, unyielding justice that I had spent every waking moment preparing to exact. The night of the gala arrived with an almost cinematic air. A storm of anticipation and veiled menace cloaked the opulent ballroom where I had orchestrated my masterstroke. I arrived early, blending into the sea of well-dressed guests, my eyes fixed on the entrance. Every detail had been arranged to perfection, every moment choreographed to strip Cassandra of her carefully constructed facade. I watched as the guests mingled, their conversations laced with an undercurrent of excitement and apprehension. The room was a veritable stage for my plan, with hidden cameras and discreet microphones capturing every whispered secret. I moved with deliberate calm among the crowd, each step a silent testament to the months of meticulous planning. My mind raced back over the evidence I had gathered, the recorded conversations, the scandalous photographs, the damning messages. All of it would soon converge into a moment of irreversible exposure. Then she arrived. Cassandra entered with a flourish, as if on cue, her every movement radiating a false aura of elegance and confidence. She wore a dazzling gown that shimmered under the soft lights, her smile a practiced mask that concealed the treachery within. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting second, our gazes met. In that moment, I saw not the woman I had once loved, but a cold, calculating enemy who believed herself untouchable. I felt a bitter satisfaction as I watched her glide across the room, completely unaware that the trap was closing in. As the evening progressed, the first twist of my plan unfolded. I had arranged for one of Cassandra's closest confidants, a man who had long suffered under her manipulations, to take the stage under the guise of making a toast in honor of my father's legacy. With the clinking of crystal and murmurs of approval, he began to speak. His voice, trembling at first, gained strength as he recounted a series of personal betrayals. He described in stark detail how Cassandra had used her charm and deceit to orchestrate a life of duplicity, leaving a trail of ruined lives in her wake. The audience, captivated and uneasy, listened intently as the damning narrative unfolded. His confession was the spark that set the tone for the night. But Cassandra was not one to succumb without a fight. In a desperate bid to salvage her crumbling empire, she attempted to take control of the narrative. As the toast concluded, she abruptly took the microphone, her tone syrupy sweet yet laced with a manic undertone. "I confess," she began, her voice quivering with feigned remorse, "that I have made mistakes that have hurt the ones I loved." For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the room fell silent. It was as if the world had paused, waiting to see if she would finally show a glimmer of genuine contrition. I leaned in, every fiber of my being anticipating the moment when her carefully constructed mask would shatter completely. But Cassandra, with the skill of a seasoned manipulator, managed to pivot, speaking in ambiguous platitudes, deflecting questions, and laughing off inquiries as if they were the trivialities of an overdramatic play. Her voice, smooth and unrepentant, barely concealed her panic beneath the surface. The guests, caught in the swirl of conflicting narratives, began to murmur uncertainly among themselves. Yet I was prepared for this final twist. I had secretly coordinated with a group of investigative journalists and key members of the community who had grown weary of her reign of deceit. As Cassandra's desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative reached its crescendo, a series of screens around the ballroom flickered to life. One by one, images and recorded messages began to play, a montage of her clandestine meetings, the illicit phone calls, and the incriminating whispers captured over months of careful surveillance. The evidence was irrefutable, presented in a relentless barrage of truth that left no room for her counter-narrative. In that moment, as the screens illuminated the stark reality of her betrayals, I felt a cold, calculated surge of victory. The room transformed from a scene of elegant festivity into a tribunal of judgment, the air thick with shock and indignation. Guests who had once been swayed by her charm now stared in disbelief at the undeniable evidence laid bare before them. Cassandra's face contorted with a mix of fury and desperation. The woman who had so brazenly flaunted her false confession was now reduced to a trembling shadow, her every lie unraveled by the merciless light of truth. Yet even in her humiliation, Cassandra tried to salvage her dignity. With a snarl, she attempted to discredit the evidence, accusing me of orchestrating a personal vendetta, a claim as baseless as it was venomous. Her words fell flat, drowned out by the weight of the meticulously gathered proof and the collective murmur of the crowd. It was the tipping point. The grand facade of her duplicity had been irrevocably dismantled. Standing there in the midst of the chaos, I felt a complex mix of vindication and melancholy. The night's events, though a triumph of justice, also marked the irrevocable end of the life I had once known, a life built on trust, however misplaced, in the illusions of a shared future. Cassandra's downfall was complete, and with it, the shattering of a bond that had once been sacred. I knew that the repercussions of this night would ripple far beyond our personal vendetta. The public exposure of her deceptions would not only secure my father's legacy but also serve as a stark warning to all who dared to manipulate truth for personal gain. In that transformative moment, I embraced a new reality, one where retribution was served cold and justice was a currency paid in full, regardless of the cost. In the aftermath of that fateful gala, the air was heavy with the aftermath of shattered illusions and broken alliances. The revelry had turned to dismay, and while many whispered about Cassandra's public unmasking, I found myself grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. The victory was bittersweet, a triumph over betrayal, yes, but also a reminder of the love that had once been genuine, however tainted by her duplicity. I retreated to the solitude of my study, the echoes of the night's chaos reverberating in my mind. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the ruin of a once-hallowed union. I pored over every piece of evidence with a critical eye, revisiting each detail that had led me to this point. With every scanned document and every grainy video clip, I felt a relentless, cold resolve harden within me. The truth was irrefutable, and Cassandra's web of lies was now in ruins, but I wasn't finished yet. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was far more explosive than I had ever anticipated. The media had caught wind of the scandal, and the details of Cassandra's deceit splashed across headlines, leaving her reputation in tatters. But this public humiliation, as satisfying as it might be to some, brought forth unexpected complications. Several influential figures, once in her inner circle, began to shift their allegiances. Some, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, sought refuge in my shadow, attempting to rewrite the narrative of their own involvement. Others, embittered by Cassandra's betrayals, became allies in my quest for a deeper, more calculated vengeance. One evening, a discreet knock on my door shattered the quiet of my study. I opened it to find Marcus, a man whose trust one had long valued, though his own moral compass had been blurred by his association with Cassandra. His eyes bore the weight of regret as he revealed that he, too, had been a victim of her manipulative schemes, betrayed in ways that went far beyond infidelity. He offered me documents, emails, and internal communications that not only detailed her treachery but hinted at an even more sinister underbelly of corruption and extortion. Cassandra had been playing a dangerous game, using her allure to ensnare powerful men into compromising situations, then leveraging that information to secure her position. The implications were staggering. I now held evidence that could implicate not only Cassandra but also a network of influential figures who had enabled her ascent. This twist added a new dimension to my pursuit of justice. It was no longer merely a personal vendetta. It was a crusade against a system of deceit that had been allowed to flourish under the guise of charm and sophistication. I began to compile a comprehensive dossier that spanned not just our private lives, but the very corridors of power. Every incriminating email, every covert meeting recorded in hushed voices, became a brick in the foundation of a far-reaching expose. Yet amidst the strategic planning and political maneuvering, I couldn't shake the quiet moments of introspection that haunted me. There were nights when the weight of vengeance pressed down on me, and I questioned if the path I had chosen was one of cold, unfeeling retribution, or if it was the only path left after all the betrayals I had endured. I wrestled with the duality of my emotions, the satisfaction of seeing Cassandra's meticulously constructed facade crumble, juxtaposed with a gnawing loneliness that seemed to echo through every empty room. In these moments, I reminded myself that this was not merely about settling a personal score, but about reclaiming the honor and legacy my father had instilled in me. As I navigated this treacherous landscape, I was acutely aware that Cassandra was not one to accept defeat quietly. Rumors began to circulate that she was plotting a counteroffensive, a desperate bid to regain control of the narrative. Her once confident demeanor now seemed laced with a touch of panic, and I caught whispers that she might be reaching out to some of her former allies for one final, desperate maneuver. This realization sharpened my focus. I knew that every moment I delayed, every moment I hesitated, would only give her a chance to slip back into the shadows. The stakes were higher now than ever before. Determined to maintain the upper hand, I arranged for a series of private meetings with key figures in the media and law enforcement, ensuring that the full extent of Cassandra's manipulations would not only be revealed to the public, but also met with the proper legal scrutiny. My goal was clear: to force a reckoning that would leave no doubt about the nature of her crimes. Every detail had to be perfect, every fact undeniable, so that when the dominoes finally began to fall, there would be no escaping the consequences of her actions. In the cold clarity of my resolve, I began to draft plans for the next phase, a phase that would strip Cassandra of every remaining vestige of power, ensuring that her reign of deceit was permanently ended. I would let the law take its course, but I also planned to deliver one final, personal blow, a moment that would force her to confront the full measure of her guilt, not with words or pleas, but with a revelation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The game was far from over. It had only deepened, transforming from a mere affair of the heart into a battle for justice, honor, and the reclamation of my own identity. Every move was now part of a larger strategy, a meticulous chess game where the consequences of each decision resonated on both a personal and public level. And as I prepared for what was to come, a quiet determination settled within me. Cassandra had underestimated the depths of my resolve, and she would soon learn that retribution was not only inevitable, but also executed with a precision that left no room for mercy. In the weeks that followed the gala, the atmosphere around me grew colder. Even as the public uproar over Cassandra's exposed misdeeds began to settle into a dull, regretful murmur, I knew that the public spectacle had been only the prelude to the final act in our dark drama. Cassandra's network of lies and manipulations had crumbled in the light of day, but I also sensed that beneath her veneer of forced contrition, a stubborn defiance still simmered. She had been slipping into the shadows, plotting a counteroffensive to salvage even a shred of her once untouchable status. That was a dangerous miscalculation. Late one rainy evening, I received a cryptic message, one that carried the heavy, unmistakable scent of her arrogance. It was a terse invitation, couched in the language of reconciliation and feigned regret, asking me to meet her at a secluded villa on the outskirts of the city. Cassandra's words dripped with insincerity, a final plea for forgiveness, a chance to set things right. I knew that behind this desperate overture lay a hidden agenda. She was trying to regain control, to manipulate the narrative one last time. I accepted the invitation, my resolve hardening with every passing moment. This meeting, I decided, would be the stage for the ultimate reckoning, a confrontation where her lies would be met with the cold, unyielding justice of my own making. That night, the villa loomed against a slate-gray sky, its isolated location rendering it the perfect arena for what I had planned. I arrived early, positioning myself in the shadowed periphery, where the soft glow of a single lamp delineated a space filled with eerie silence and whispered threats. Every detail had been calculated. The deserted driveway, the minimal security, and the absence of prying eyes all served to create an atmosphere where only the truth and its consequences could prevail. Cassandra arrived punctually, her posture as impeccable as ever, yet her eyes betrayed a hint of anxiety, a fleeting glimpse of the guilt and panic that lurked beneath her practiced mask. Dressed in a tailored suit that belied her usual flamboyance, she carried herself with the same arrogant grace that had once enchanted and, later, infuriated me. As she stepped into the dimly lit foyer, our eyes locked, and I saw in hers a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. But I was no longer the man who had once been dazzled by her charm. I was a man transformed, tempered by betrayal and sharpened by revenge. We retired to a sparsely furnished drawing room, the tension between us as palpable as the chill in the air. For a long, agonizing moment, we exchanged no words. The silence was filled with the weight of every lie, every broken promise, every calculated deceit. Then, in a voice that trembled with a mixture of defiance and resignation, Cassandra began to speak. She launched into a half-hearted litany of excuses, vague apologies, reluctant admissions of minor transgressions, and insinuations that her actions had been misunderstood. Yet, every sentence was laced with her habitual duplicity, a feeble attempt to twist the narrative in her favor. I listened, my face an impassive mask, as she evaded the crux of her betrayal. When I pressed her with questions that cut to the bone, the secret meetings, the clandestine phone calls, the stolen money, her composure finally began to crumble. In a moment of rare vulnerability, with the damning evidence of her infidelities and financial deceptions echoing in my mind, Cassandra's facade shattered. Her tone faltered as she muttered, almost inaudibly, I did it. I cheated. I stole, too. Her confession was fragmented, a hurried admission coming only after all other defenses had collapsed. It was as if, at that final minute, the weight of her accumulated lies had become unbearable. That was the moment I had been orchestrating for so long. In that dimly lit room, under the indifferent gaze of the moon through a high window, I saw not the woman I once claimed to love, but the cunning manipulator who had betrayed me so thoroughly. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a cold, hollow resignation. And in that instant, with my heart a tumult of sorrow and vindictive resolve, I knew there could be no reconciliation, no return to the life we once shared. I rose slowly, my movements deliberate and measured, and walked toward her with the calm of a man who had already sealed her fate. Your confession, Cassandra, comes too late, I said in a voice as cold and steady as the winter wind outside. There was no dramatic flourish, no theatrics, just the unvarnished truth of a final judgment rendered without mercy. In that suspended moment, I produced the instrument of my long-planned retribution, a weapon chosen not for its brutality alone, but for the symbolic finality it carried. With each measured step, I approached her, her eyes widening in a mix of terror and desperate regret. I could see her mind racing, trying to salvage even the remnants of her dignity, but I was already beyond the point of return. My resolve was absolute, my intent unmistakable. There, in the quiet solitude of that forsaken villa, I executed my final act of revenge. With a cold, unwavering precision, I ended her life, severing the last ties to a legacy of betrayal and deceit. It was not a spur-of-the-moment burst of passion, but a calculated, almost clinical fulfillment of every slight and every lie she had ever spun. As I stood over the still form of the woman who had once manipulated so many, a profound emptiness mingled with a sense of grim satisfaction. Cassandra's reign of treachery was over, her deceptive voice silenced forever in a final, irrevocable act of cold-blooded retribution. In that moment, I felt neither joy nor relief, only the stark, unyielding clarity that justice had been served. The burden of betrayal had been lifted, replaced by a chilling certainty that the price of her deceit was paid in full. And as I stepped away from the scene, the night swallowed me up, leaving behind only the echo of a life undone by lies and the irrevocable finality of a man's unyielding resolve. The cold silence of that villa still haunted me as I slipped away into the night, leaving behind a scene that would forever mark the point of no return. In the days that followed, I found myself ensnared in a labyrinth of consequences I had never truly foreseen. Cassandra's lifeless form had become the final punctuation in our bitter tale of betrayal. Yet as I walked the lonely streets in the early hours, an unsettling thought gnawed at me. The price of retribution was far steeper than I had imagined. At first, I convinced myself that I had severed the final tie to her treachery, that in extinguishing her life, I had reclaimed my honor and my future. But the shockwaves of that fateful night rippled outward, drawing unwanted attention from all corners. Late-night calls, furtive glances from strangers, and an undercurrent of suspicion in every whispered conversation made it clear that my meticulously constructed plan was unraveling in ways I had not anticipated. I began to receive messages from anonymous sources, hints that someone or something was watching me closely. These missives were cryptic, sometimes laced with ominous warnings that hinted at a greater conspiracy behind Cassandra's tangled web. It wasn't long before the authorities started knocking at the door of my carefully isolated world. A relentless detective, whose unwavering gaze seemed to pierce through every defense, took an interest in the case. His presence was a constant reminder that the finality I had imposed on Cassandra was not as conclusive as I had believed. I knew that every meticulous detail of my revenge, every calculated move, was now under scrutiny. With every passing day, I felt the pressure of eyes that saw too much, each investigative inquiry chipping away at the ironclad resolve I had once possessed. As I attempted to navigate this precarious new reality, another twist emerged from the murk of my past. One night, while reviewing my files in the solitude of my study, I discovered a series of encrypted messages hidden within a digital folder I had long forgotten. They were from my father, messages that had been meant to guide me in times of personal crisis, counsel that now struck me with an eerie prescience. My father had always been a man of principles, and these messages hinted at secrets buried deep within our family legacy, secrets that intertwined with Cassandra's machinations in ways I could scarcely comprehend. It was as if the betrayal I had experienced was but a fragment of a larger, more insidious game, one that my father had anticipated and perhaps even orchestrated from afar. Haunted by these revelations, I began to question the very nature of justice and revenge. Every day, the lines between right and wrong blurred further. I found myself increasingly isolated, not only from the remnants of my shattered personal life but also from the community that once held me in esteem. The investigative detective, with his relentless pursuit of truth, began to unearth connections between Cassandra's allies and influential figures in our social circles, connections that implicated far more than just a cheating spouse. I realized that the network of deceit stretched wider than I had ever imagined, entangling powerful individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. In the midst of this moral and existential turmoil, a final, unexpected twist presented itself. A trusted confidant, whose loyalty I had never doubted, reached out with a confession of their own. They admitted that they had been complicit in some of the darker dealings that had led up to Cassandra's exposure, actions that, while reprehensible, had been motivated by a desperate desire to break free from her oppressive influence. Their confession was both a plea for absolution and a warning. The fallout from that night was far from over. They hinted at a shadowy collective, a cadre of individuals who thrived on manipulation and whose reach extended into every corner of our society. Their words painted a picture of a hidden hierarchy, one in which Cassandra had been a mere pawn, and now, in the wake of her death, I was poised to become their next target. Torn between the satisfaction of having exacted what I believed was just retribution and the growing realization that I had stepped into a far more dangerous arena, I felt the weight of destiny pressing upon me. The same cold determination that had driven me to that villain now warred with a burgeoning sense of dread. I was being pulled into a vortex of secrets and lies that reached back generations, threatening to engulf me entirely. In this newfound darkness, every ally could be an enemy, and every piece of evidence might be a double-edged sword. As I prepared to confront these revelations head-on, I understood that my journey was far from its end. The path of revenge I had chosen had opened a door to a world where power, corruption, and vengeance were inextricably linked, a world where the only certainty was the harsh truth that no act of retribution could ever be isolated from its consequences. I had become a man marked not only by personal loss and betrayal but by the realization that, in seeking justice, I might have unleashed a force far beyond my control. Now, as I sit in the quiet twilight of my study, poring over the newly uncovered messages and the confessions of those once trusted, I prepare for the inevitable next steps. The storm of consequence is gathering, and with every passing moment, I feel the encroaching threat of an unseen enemy, ready to exploit every crack in my resolve. In the shadow of my own actions, I stand at the precipice of a future fraught with uncertainty, haunted by secrets, hunted by adversaries, and bound by a destiny I never chose but must now face head-on. In the wake of my confrontation at the villa and the subsequent revelations, my nights became a battleground of restless dreams and waking nightmares. The weight of my actions pressed heavily upon me, not merely as a memory of Cassandra's final moments, but as an omen of deeper, darker forces at play. Every shadow in my study seemed to whisper secrets of treachery, and every unexpected knock at my door carried the potential for catastrophe. The truth was, I was now tangled in a web that extended far beyond the confines of a bitter marriage, a web woven by a clandestine cabal that had manipulated events from the shadows for generations. I spent countless hours poring over the encrypted messages from my father, the coded warnings that had hinted at hidden family secrets and unspoken alliances. They painted a picture of an inheritance that was more than just money. It was a legacy steeped in power, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of control. My father had trusted me to honor this legacy with integrity, yet here I was, having bludgeoned the very principles he had once held sacred. The realization gnawed at me. Perhaps my own hand had been guided by forces beyond my control, predestined by secrets too vast to unravel in one lifetime. My investigation into Cassandra's network had taken an unexpected turn. The anonymous confessor, a trusted confidant whose eyes brimmed with remorse, had alluded to a hidden hierarchy operating in the corridors of power, a secret society that thrived on manipulation, extortion, and the exploitation of weaknesses. Their message was clear. Cassandra was only a minor player, a disposable pawn in a grander game of shadows. And now, with her demise, I had unwittingly disrupted the delicate balance they had maintained for decades. Haunted by this revelation, I began to receive subtle, yet unmistakable, signs of surveillance. A black sedan that seemed to appear wherever I went, late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when I answered, and cryptic emails containing fragments of a familiar code. The relentless detective, whose unwavering pursuit had already placed me under a microscope, seemed to find fresh leads in these anomalies. Each new clue was a double-edged sword. While they affirmed my growing suspicion that I was being watched, they also threatened to expose me further. I had crossed a line that now separated a personal vendetta from a larger, more dangerous conspiracy. Determined not to be cornered, I doubled down on my efforts to decipher my father's messages. Late into the night, surrounded by scattered documents and illuminated only by the flickering light of my desk lamp, I retraced the steps he had taken. Hidden within a series of meticulously penned letters were references to a long-forgotten estate, a remote compound rumored to be the meeting ground of those who wielded true power in our family's past. The compound was said to be both a sanctuary and a vault of secrets, a place where allegiances were forged in silence and betrayal was met with swift, unyielding retribution. The possibility that my father might have anticipated the very events that now unraveled before me filled me with a blend of dread and determination. Could it be that his cryptic instructions were not merely warnings, but a guide to surviving the onslaught of a secretive elite? The idea was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because it offered a glimmer of hope that I might yet regain control over my destiny. Terrifying, because it meant that the enemy I now faced was as old as our bloodline, a force that had honed its art of deceit and retribution over generations. With no time to waste, I embarked on a journey to the estate, driven by a desperate need to understand the legacy that bound me. The journey itself was fraught with danger, a series of narrow escapes, moments of intense paranoia, and the unshakable feeling that I was being led into a trap. As I navigated the labyrinthine roads of a remote countryside, every twist and turn felt orchestrated, as if unseen hands were guiding me toward an inevitable confrontation. Upon arriving at the estate, a sprawling, ivy-covered mansion hidden amidst dense woods, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of foreboding. The atmosphere was thick with history and unspoken grief, as though the very walls had absorbed centuries of secrets and sorrow. Inside, I discovered an archive of family records, old photographs, and journals that chronicled the rise and fall of a dynasty built on